Good morning, church. It's really great to be here this morning. There's just a neat energy and buzz in the place. It was so good to walk in the lobby and to see all the different partners that we have, that we work with, that are making a difference in the city. Great to hear the choir and to celebrate that, and great to hear from Jeff and just how you've been welcomed into our church, and so we really celebrate that as well. And so this is a good Sunday, and it is an annual tradition. Every spring at our church, we have our Mission Sundays where we celebrate our involvement in missions. And as Guy and Marie talked about, this is our local Mission Sunday where we focus on what's happening locally in the Lethbridge region. And next week we'll be focusing globally. And we have a guest speaker coming next week. His name is Dr. Gary Nelson, and he's from Tyndale University and Seminary in Toronto. And he's one of the leading voices on missions. He's got a lot of experience having worked in urban ministry in Canada as well as supported ministry around the world. And so you want to come back and to hear and to celebrate with us next week. We just read a passage from Hebrews here, a passage that refers to running a race. And I felt that God kind of put this on my heart, and I was drawn to speak on this passage today because missions is not a spectator sport. It's not something that we sit back and observe. It's not something that we just cheer on from time to time. Missions is something that we engage with. Missions is something that we participate in. It's something for everyone who calls themselves a Christian. We are called to missions. And this is not a mindset that is new. If you've been coming to the services over the last few months, we started in January a series on vocation. And we talked about how missions is our vocation. And we also had a series after that we talked about, the Blueprint series, where we talked about the kingdom of God and how missions is at the heart of the kingdom. So this is not new. And in some ways, Mission Sunday is every Sunday. It's not just now. It's every Sunday. And today is simply a day where we celebrate the partnerships that we have locally and what God is doing locally. And next week we'll be celebrating the partnerships that we have internationally and around the world. The Hebrews writer knows that missions can be challenging, and that's why he compares it to a race, a long-distance race. And I have to admit, this is not the easiest analogy for me. I've never enjoyed running just for the sake of running. I like it, it's okay if it's a team sport or something like that where you're chasing a ball and you can tackle the person, but to just run for the sake of running has never resonated with me. And yet I appreciate it. I've had friends that run, and I know it takes a lot of discipline. I know it takes a lot of determination. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but I just found out recently that one of the world's most difficult races, marathons, is run here in Alberta. For over 19 years, Grande Cache has hosted the Ultra Marathon each year. Approximately 1,000 participants gather from around the world to run this Ultra Marathon. And the competitors must finish the race within 24 hours. That's a long time to run. It takes the winner usually about 14 hours to finish this race. And there's an advertisement for it right now, and I'm going to read it to you. Canadian Death Race 20, it's its 20th anniversary. August 3rd and 4th, 2019. Since the start of the millennium, racers have come across to the Canadian Rockies to cheat death in one of the world's toughest ultramarathons. The 125-kilometer, did you hear that? 125-kilometer course begins and ends on a 4,200-foot plateau, passes over the 3 mountain summits, and not only includes over 17,000 feet of elevation change, but a major river crossing at the spectacular Hell's Gate Canyon. How appropriate. Each year, extreme athletes push themselves to the limits of their endurance against the breathtaking background of the Canadian Rocky Mountains. They might want to consider that it's not just the mountains taking their breath away as they're doing this. Well-trained and totally committed, they battle heat, cold, and altitude. Finishing is the prize, and the bragging rights are priceless. Canadian death race. It's a killer. Register here. I don't think so. If you want more information on that, you can talk to me afterwards. One of the questions that comes to my mind when I hear that after I ask why is what or how? How do they do this? How do they do it? How do they keep running kilometer after kilometer? How do they keep running hour upon hour? How do they keep running when the terrain gets steep and they hit those inclines and the paths are bumpy? How do they keep running when their weather conditions turn against them? When I think about this, I begin to appreciate what the writer of Hebrews and why he chose the running analogy. Living on mission can be hard. And Hebrews gives us insight into how we can press on, how we can face the challenges, how we can overcome the challenges, and how we can win the race. First, the writer of Hebrews tells us that the people on mission have faith. In the first two verses of Hebrews 11, we read, "Faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see." This is what the ancients were commended for. Let's just stop and ponder that for a bit. Faith is confidence in what we hope for, an assurance about what we do not see. Eugene Peterson puts it this way in the Message: the fundamental fact of existence in that this trust in God, this faith, is the firm foundation under everything that makes life worth living. It's our handle on what we can't see. Faith is confidence. Faith is assurance. Faith is a firm foundation under everything that makes life worth living. That's the beginning of living on mission. Now, faith can be a difficult thing to talk about. It's kind of abstract. It can be seen a little nebulous. And people use it in different ways. Sometimes people will ask you, "Are you a person of faith?" Meaning, do you practice a religion? Or sometimes the term faith is used to describe a kind of blind optimism, or I hope so feeling. I have faith that we will find our hotel sometime. And sometimes people use the term faith in superstitious ways. We're going to the hockey playoffs. Teams will say, "We have faith that we can win that hockey game." And then they come out of the locker room in a certain order, or the coach wears a certain color tie, or the goalies hit their goalposts in a certain pattern and skate into the corner. They have faith. The faith that we're talking about here in Hebrews is none of these. Rather, there's an understanding that faith is only as good as the object of your faith, what you put your faith in. And the focus of Christian faith is God. And not some made-up understanding of God. And certainly not a God made up of what Bruxy Cavey describes as the smorgasbord of spirituality that's becoming more common today. He says people often try a little bit of everything, but really indulge in none. Or they're like the people who are addicted to the romance of dating, but afraid of the hard work of marriage. And while it might be thrilling at the time, ultimately it misses out on the authentic and deep personal experience. Scripture calls us to a committed relationship with the one true God and knowing Him personally. In Deuteronomy 6:4, we hear the primary call to Israel, which is later repeated by Jesus in the Great Commandment. The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. The Ten Commandments reinforce this. Exodus, I am your God. You shall have no other gods before me. And then when God appeared to Moses in the burning bush, and Moses asked, what about your name? He wanted to know about his name. God responded, I am who I am, emphasizing that God exists and has always existed. And building on that, we learned that all creation originated from this great I am. In this chapter that we've read in Hebrews, in the third verse, it says, by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what was seen was not made out of what was visible. He is the creator. He is the originator. And as we continue to look into scriptures, we learn about the one and only God, who's not just the creator, but he's the sustainer. He's the one who's personally involved with his people and with his creation. We are reminded that we serve a God who loves, one who responds to broken and sinful and hurting people with grace and mercy. And we come to know a God who loves righteousness and justice and chooses to work through people to set things right, to create shalom, to reconcile relationships. We meet a God who's active, who's moving, and who's on mission, accomplishing his purpose. Mark Twain is quoted as saying, faith is believing in what you know it ain't. Faith is believing what you know ain't so. Hard to say that. I disagree with him. In fact, my observation is that most people put their faith in something, what they believe to be so. The Christian's faith, my faith, is an intentional choice based on my understanding and our understanding of God revealed in the Scriptures. A God, from my perspective, that's worth building your life on, a foundation. A number of years ago, I met a man who was homeless and really struggling in life. He had an addiction. He struggled with a severe mental illness, paranoid schizophrenia. His world was frightening. It was terrifying. And he often would end up in trouble because he was always reacting to that world in the community, reacting to his delusions, reacting to his hallucinations. His life was a constant battle, a constant turmoil, a constant struggle. And he just made it through most days. And after journeying with him for about 2 years, I asked him, what keeps you going? He said this, I believe there's a God out there who loves me, and he has some sort of purpose for my life. I never forgot that answer. Faith is confidence in what we hope for, an assurance about what we do not see. Not only do people on mission have faith, but they also follow. Chapter 11 provides an amazing overview of people who had the confidence and assurance because of their faith. And a result of that, they stepped out and responded to God's call in their life. And I'd encourage you to go home this afternoon and to read through that chapter. We're not going to do that right now. But over and over, you will read, by faith, by faith, by faith, by faith Abel, by faith Enoch, by faith Noah, by faith Abraham, by faith Sarah, by faith Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Moses, and the list goes on. Ordinary people. People who are not perfect. People who made big mistakes if you read their stories. But people who stepped out in faith and made a difference. And each one of them played a place in serving God and serving his purpose. In a specific time, in a specific place in history, they helped accomplish his mission. They're part of that great crowd of witnesses that have gone on before, helping us to be where we are here today. And there have been millions and millions since, when you cover church history over the centuries. People who the baton's been passed on to them and they've continued to run that race. And we're part of that. We witnessed it last weekend here, last Sunday, where the baton was passed on from our former lead pastor, Ian Mawson, to our new lead pastor here, Jeff. The baton gets passed on. But we need to remember here, it's not just Jeff carrying the baton. Right, Jeff? We're all carrying the baton. We're all in this race. You see, if we say that we are people with a faith in God, that means we are saying we trust God and we follow Him. To say you trust God and aren't willing to follow is like saying you trust your mechanic, but you never take his advice. Your alternator's shot. You need to get that fixed. I don't know. That costs a lot of money. How about we just exchange the air filter? I'm good with that. That's not trust. Making disciples is hearing the voice of God, obeying the voice of God, and then teaching others to do the same. We're all followers. And a couple of weeks ago, as Jeff talked about, many of us responded and came up here and added paint and added color to this canvas of Lethbridge, saying, we're all in. We're all in for you, God, with you, God. We're followers. But it can't stop with dried paint. It can't stop at that. We actually got to get out and paint the town, to borrow an expression and maybe redeem an expression. We got to paint the town with God's love and make it come alive and make it beautiful and be part of that. And I want us to be praying about that. I want us to be praying and listening as individuals, but also as a church, about where is God leading us? Where is God taking us? We all live in neighborhoods. Maybe there's God's providing you with an opportunity, some creative opportunity to meet with your neighbors and to connect with your neighbors. Or maybe you have an open door at your workplace with a colleague, or if you're at school as a student with somebody. Or maybe God has placed on your heart our Matthew 25 brothers and sisters, those who lack the basic needs, food, shelter, and clothing, those who are lonely and sick, and maybe even those who are in prison. We have a lot of great ministry partners that we work with as a church. And God might be saying to you, step out in faith. Try some of these things. I want you to be part of these things. The kingdom work gets done through these things. We have an insert in the bulletin that you can look at that lists some of the partners that we have here. You can look them up, or you can try and meet them afterwards in the lobby. Learn about our ministry partners and who we're a part of. Pray for them. But listen, is God calling you to get involved? Or maybe God's putting it on your heart to get involved in some of our community-based ministries. And we talked about that. We have two primary ones here as a church. We have the intercultural ministries, welcoming newcomers to Lethbridge. It's a great group. There's amazing stories. You got people like Guy and Marie who introduced the service, opened us up. That you can get to know people who need new friends. They're in a new city. They're starting a new life. And be part of that. Or maybe you want to join the prison ministry and God's put that on your heart. It's for the most ostracized and marginalized people in our society. Again, amazing stories of how God is working there. And recently another need has surfaced that I've become aware of in our city, and it was mentioned on the screen when we talked about what's happening in our city. For years, homelessness was on the decline in Lethbridge, but in the last 2 years, it has spiked, and it's going back up. And there's a lot of conversation about what's going on, and part of it is how can the church respond and be a part of the response to this? We need to listen and discern what God is telling us. But what I know right now is that the Salvation Army has a critical need. I was talking to them this last week, and they are part of the Housing First process. They manage the furniture bank for the Housing First. People who don't have housing are moving into affordable housing, and the warehouse is almost empty. And so I'm letting you know that we can donate there. Please call before you go there so that they know you're coming. That'll work best. But they need bedroom things, dressers, bedside tables, lamps, mattresses, kitchen tables, chairs, small appliances, pots, pans, living room, couches, coffee tables. These are practical ways that we can make a difference. Sometimes we think we've got to do big things, but the kingdom of God is often small and takes small things that make a big difference. Think about this. Do you have a way that you can help? Let's seriously pray about how God is calling us to touch our city. And I'm going to encourage you to look at it in 3D. 3Ds, discover. Remember that it's God's mission. So look around and see what God is doing. Meet with people, ask questions, and listen. What is God telling you? Discern. Ask, what are your gifts? What are my passions? What resources do I have? And how do they fit with what God is doing? How can I participate? And I found it's always good to talk to a few people as you're doing that discerning. And then do. The first two steps don't mean a lot unless we actually step out and take action. Respond in obedience. That's what God calls us to. So for some of you, this may all sound a bit risky and you're not sure about launching into something completely new. Remember those who've gone before us, those people of faith. That's why their names are written down in this book of Hebrews. They're there to encourage us, to inspire us. One of those names is Abraham, and it says in verse 8, he obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. He had faith in God, and that God was going before him, and he stepped out because of that. Sometimes we just have to step out in faith and trust God goes before us. As Canadians, we tend to put a high value on safety and on security, and we're a bit risk-adverse. We might want to consider the advice that one of Shane Claiborne's college professors shared with him in a class. He said this, all around you, people will be tiptoeing through life, just to arrive at death safely. But dear children, do not tiptoe. Run, hope, skip, or dance. Just don't tiptoe. And I wish I could say it'll always be easy, but I can't. As you get out in the community and you rub shoulders, we will run into people who have different value systems, different worldviews, different understandings. And especially as Canadian values start to move further and further away from traditional Christian values, and also as medical advancements take place and technological advancements take place, it raises more and more complex ethical debates. And we need to be in those discussions. We need to learn to speak truth and grace in these conversations. Our theme for Mission Sundays for this year is living in the borderlands, which is exactly what I'm inviting us to do, to live in the borderlands. And next week, our guest speaker, Dr. Gary Nelson, will be talking about this. He's written a book on this, about how we live in the borderlands where faith and other faiths and no faith interact with each other. It's like when the nation of Israel was in exile in Babylon, and they had to learn to live out their faith in the borderlands. We have to ask ourselves, what is God doing in this place? And what is God doing at this time? And I'm confident that there's going to be great opportunity ahead, great opportunities for adventure, great opportunities for ministry, great opportunities to make our city a better place and to be a part of what God is doing. But I also suspect that we're going to run into some things at times that are challenging, hard conversations, and maybe even a little bit of pushback. This should be no surprise. The great crowd of witnesses experienced this at the end of Hebrews, if you read it through, and in ways we likely won't experience here in Lethbridge in the near future anyways. They were jeered, they were chained, they were flogged, they were tortured, they were thrown in prison. But even with that, verse 39 says that those who suffered were all commended for their faith, and yet none of them received what had been promised, since God has planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. The most commonly repeated phrase, command actually, in the Bible is do not be afraid. Do not be afraid occurs 70 times in scriptures. How do we not be overcome by fear? How do we step out in faith? Well, it all depends on where we put our focus. When we're on mission, not only do we have faith, not only do we follow, but we also need to stay focused. I learned about the importance of focus in racing, when I actually met a motorcycle racer. He used to be the Canadian champion. And he was my driving instructor when I took the course. And he taught us all kinds of things, but he kept coming back to this one thing. You always hit what you focus on. He said as a racer, he always had to look where there was opportunity to pass, and he focused on that. He always had to look where there was time where he could just cut his time a little bit, and he kept focused on that. But he said new drivers often will get into accidents because they get afraid. And they focus on what they think they got to avoid. And they focused on the parked car, and they focused on the guardrail. And guess what they end up hitting? The parked car and the guardrail. You will always hit what you focus on. The Hebrews writer says that we should get rid of anything that hinders us, any sin that entangles us, and just keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. The Greek word for sin means to miss the mark, to miss the bullseye, to be off target. It's when we fail to live the life we were created to live that we are living in sin. There's many things that could grab our attention, many things that can get us off track. Two advocates for IGM, International Justice Missions, Bethany Huang and Kristen Johnson, warn that there's a tendency for people who engage in serving the needs of others to gradually miss the mark by seeing themselves as justice heroes. Rather than understanding it's God's mission and that it's God that changes lives, we start to think that it's our mission and that we change people's lives. This puts the focus on us, and eventually it will always become self-serving. It misses the mark. It's sin. We need to keep focused on Jesus. It's not about us. He's the one who ran the most difficult race. He's the one who endured the cross and scorned its shame. And it's because of the cross that we, each one of us, can experience forgiveness and have transformed lives. And it's because of the cross that we know how to serve, and to serve as Jesus did, who laid down his life, and we ought to do the same. This summer in Grand Calche, Alberta, they're going to be running a death race. That may be something you're interested in. Like I said, if you want information, you can see me after. But here at E-Free, we're running a life race. Jesus said, I have come that you might have life and that you might have it abundantly. John 10:10. Let's join together. Let's run for life. And let's run for others' lives.